Welcome to Nerds at Church, a podcast about nerdery and the Bible. I'm Pastor Emily, and I use pronouns like they, them, theirs.
And I'm Pastor Kay, and my pronouns are she, her. In this episode, we'll discuss the readings for Easter Sunday, which this year falls on April 9th. And if you'd like to listen to our thoughts on the Easter account from the Gospel of John, please listen to our Easter Vigil episode that we just released.
Check out the episode description for links to the Bible passages and the many other references we make in this episode.
So many. So those of you who have been listening to us for a while might have realized that we've done a lot of very thinky, very emotionally heavy deep dives lately, and we decided, you know what, it's Easter, let's enjoy ourselves. So our deep dive for today is on eggs and baby animals, because let's be honest, plenty of people talk about those at church on Sunday anyway. And so you may as well have some interesting examples available to you, or if you go to your family meal for Easter and things get awkward, whipping out a egg fact might just save the conversation. Who knows? Anything can happen.
It's true. And it gives you something else to do besides pull out the plastic egg, tell the story of Holy Week eggs, which I am familiar with from internship.
Absolutely. Although if you want a recipe for resurrection rolls, you will probably have to go elsewhere. Although I hear those are amazing and I do want to try making. Basically,
what are resurrection?
You take a roll and you put a marshmallow in the middle of it before you bake it, and then the marshmallow disappears while it's baking and makes the whole thing nice and sweet, because the marshmallow basically melts into the roll, and then there's this big empty hole in the middle of the roll. So it looks like
that sounds
but I've never gotten to try them.
Delightful.
I know, they sound wonderful. And I'm not really a hot cross buns kind of person, so this is the church-related baked good that I'm more interested in. So why are we talking about eggs and baby animals today? I mean, talking about food, I understand that. We talk about food at church all the time. That makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm. But eggs and baby animals are Easter symbols because essentially they're signs of spring. Lots of animals have their babies in the spring and lay eggs in the spring. And also, of course, we have all of those flowers and spring flower colors, and lots of freshly grown grass are common signs of Easter and put into Easter baskets.
Mm-hmm.
So all of those are signs of spring and therefore signs of new life and Easter. And they've sort of been co-opted over the years. However, I do feel that it's important to point out that bunnies do not lay eggs. Bunnies are a symbol of Easter. Eggs are a valid symbol of Easter. Bunnies and eggs do not necessarily go together, except, of course, for the Easter bunny himself or herself. We don't actually know the gender of the Easter bunny. Let's keep our minds open.
Yeah.
Themselves. And also, Jesus didn't lay eggs either. So if you are confused on that point, or if you need to clear that up for someone else, we have a tweet we can link you to from our social media pages that might be able to help you out with that. But I was deeply amused.
Yes, for sure. Also, Easter is, along with what Kay said, Easter is also connected to some of the pagan traditions from springtime and the spring equinox, right? The way we calculate Easter is the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox.
Yes, which is connected to how the Jewish people calculate Passover.
Yes, that's why a lot of times Passover and Easter are really close. Like this year, it's Holy Week and Passover overlap. And every once in a while, they're radically off because Easter is always on a Sunday and Passover is not. And so sometimes the full moon can happen between the two, that sort of thing. Yes. Also, the exception to the rule on the baby animals thing is the butterfly. The butterfly is definitely a symbol of the resurrection. It's definitely a symbol held for Christians, also for trans people. Let's just name that transition that animal goes through. And it is connected to Easter, not in the baby form, but in fact in the butterfly form, because the butterfly goes from a caterpillar to a chrysalis to a butterfly. And so there's this tomb kind of sense of caterpillar into the tomb, and a butterfly comes out. And so there's the butterfly as a symbol of the resurrection as well.
Yeah. So let's talk about why do we like to look at baby animals, because that seems to be a thing that so many of us share. I have long said that one of the major purposes of the internet is to look at pictures of cats or baby animals, and we all love doing it. It is a big part of how many people relax or get themselves into a better mood after hearing bad news. And so this seems to be a major thing that a lot of us share.
I literally just looked at baby sloths on TikTok yesterday. That's hilarious. It wasn't even
Yes.
for this episode.
I've essentially trained Facebook to show me constant reels of kittens and puppies and almost nothing else.
For a while, it was doing that with elephants for me.
Oh, nice. Yeah. So I found two articles in particular that point out a couple of things about this. One is from the Association for Psychological Science, and they cite a study saying that this study shows that viewing cute things improves subsequent performance in tasks that require behavioral carefulness, possibly by narrowing the breadth of attentional focus. And research has long shown that people are predisposed to respond to cute baby like features, a large head, a high protruding forehead, and large eyes, known as the baby schema.
Hmm.
Baby animals also have the baby schema characteristics, which helps explain why we think puppies and kittens are cuter than dogs and cats. And
Hmm.
essentially, what this is saying is that looking at cute things like baby animal photos made the students in the study more physically careful, like particularly with fine motor control. They moved slower and with greater precision while
Huh.
trying to do some tasks after looking at baby animal photos, or they were better at focusing in on specific details after looking at those photos.
That's fascinating because I do think that like a baby, like when I'm around babies, I'm
Yes.
carefuler about my surroundings. Like that
Yes, that
is,
makes perfect sense. Yeah.
yeah.
I would imagine that's probably a survival thing. Absolutely. And then also there's a study from the University of Oxford that says, in fact, cuteness may be one of the strongest forces that shapes our behavior, potentially making us more compassionate. Babies are
Hmm.
designed to jump to the front of the queue, our brain processing queue, that is. So if something is cute, we really can't help but pay attention to it, and I love that.
That is fantastic. And I love how that is very clearly like an evolutionary development
Yes.
kind of thing.
Yeah, there have been a lot of ways I've seen it phrased, again, mostly on social media, but basically, if our babies are this annoying, then they have to be cute in order to convince us to not strangle them. So,
I mean, fair, murder bad,
yes,
like
murder definitely bad.
evolutionarily speaking as well.
Also, that too,
Mm-hmm,
yes.
mm-hmm.
Okay, so, and then additionally, we thought that we would look at some different names for baby versions of animals, because some of them are kind of silly, some of them make very little sense, and some of them are just surprising.
And adorable.
So, yes, absolutely. And so, of course, baby chickens are constantly called chicks, whether male or
Mm-hmm.
female. But did you know that female baby chickens are specifically called pullets, and
Hmm.
male baby chickens are called cockerels?
So if you had a female baby chicken with a weird hairdo or
Yes.
feather do, it could be a pullet with a mullet.
Oh, no. Yes.
You did not see that one coming?
I did not know.
Yeah. Baby alpacas and baby llamas are called crias. Crias.
And a baby hare is called a leveret. But hares are different than rabbits, hares are bigger.
Okay, but then what about bunnies?
Baby rabbits are called kits or kittens or bunnies.
Oh. Hmm.
Different species.
Okay. I don't understand the difference between hares and rabbits.
Many of us have not actually seen a hare in person. A hare is much larger and has those really big, powerful back feet.
Hmm.
And their ears are also larger compared to their bodies than for bunnies, for rabbits.
Oh, I think I maybe have seen them then. I think my host dad in Slovakia grew hares, not rabbits,
Okay, sure. Yeah.
to eat.
But this might have come from my childhood reading of the book Watership Down. They are actually
Oh, I did
remarkably
not like
different
that book.
animals.
Hmm.
If you know what you're getting into, it's a good book.
Yeah, I did not.
Yeah, that would not be helpful.
Yep.
But back to baby animals.
Right. Baby hedgehogs are called hoglets.
Yes. And a baby porcupine is a porcupette. But please be careful when petting the porcupets.
Exactly. I was just thinking of like porcupine and porcupette and a pipette of porcupets.
Oh, goodness. Just squeezing out little porcupets from the pipette. Yes.
Baby eagles, like those that are seen on the eagle cam in Decorah, Iowa, although I think the eagles maybe moved on from that eagle cam, are called eaglets.
Mm-hmm. Baby skunks, which I think it actually takes a while for them to be able to make the horrible smell. But baby skunks are actually called kittens or kits. So if someone offers to show you or introduce you to a kitten, please make sure you know what species you're talking about first.
Yeah, that'd be very different.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. A baby platypus is called a puggle, which I think is
I
the
love
same
that one.
name technically as a pug poodle combo.
Yes, I've known people who have dogs like that. Yep.
So
And
again, double check what species we're talking about here.
yes, a baby dove is called either a squab or a squeaker. I think the word squab is actually shared with several other species of birds, but the squeaker one I think might be more unique to doves. I haven't heard that one separately.
That's just so cute. I've called baby humans squeakers.
I had a friend in college who had a very large stuffed elephant animal that was named Squeaker. So.
Aw, that's so cute. Because elephants are awesome. And while baby penguins have boring names, baby puffins are called pufflings, just like
Yes.
nerdlings.
Mm-hmm. And a baby frog or a baby toad, depending on its age, is called either a tadpole or a pollywog. And I just love pollywog. That's one of the
Oh.
weirdest words I've ever seen.
I didn't realize it was based on the age. So is the
I
tadpole
believe so,
first and
yes.
then pollywog?
I think so, yeah.
All right. And baby sharks, baby shark doo 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 doo, is called a pup, which doesn't have quite the same number of syllables. So doing like pup doo doo, it doesn't quite have the same ring
Not
to it.
really. Although, again, if someone offers to introduce you to a pup,
Double check
maybe
the
worry about
species.
whether or not the bite would be a problem. Yes. A baby mosquito is called a wriggler, which was just a surprise. Sure.
Yeah, that's funny. Baby elephants have to be mentioned because they're elephants and I love them, but share the name in common with like cows and other animals that a baby elephant is called a calf.
A baby goat is a kid.
So if somebody wants to introduce you to their kid,
sometimes they are actually talking about goats. I have seen people on Twitter and other social media who love their goats and love talking about their kids. Yep.
Mm-hmm. And a baby seahorse is a fry.
But are they small fry?
Yeah, they are pretty small.
Yeah. And a baby kangaroo is called a joey.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that they were on Friends. And as many of you know, while of course all animals reproduce in various ways, some animals tend more toward babies that are helpless when they're first born, and some tend more toward having babies that are born almost immediately with a certain level of independence. Now, all baby animals usually need a little help from their parents or their community.
Mm-hmm.
Especially at least for the first few days, but there's differing levels of how much help that is. So when we're talking about birds and mammals, the two terms that we use are called altricial species, which are the ones that have the very underdeveloped young at birth that need a lot of help and care and protection for the early part of their life.
Like humans.
Yes, exactly. We are one of the notable altricial species versus precocial species, which have relatively independent young when they're first born. And exactly how independent varies, I'll get into that in a moment. But for example, baby songbirds can't really move much when they first break out of their eggs, and they must be fed partially digested foods by their parents, as many of us have heard about or seen in, personally speaking, in children's books. And you can compare them to baby chicks or baby ducklings that start walking very quickly, actually, after they break out of their egg, and they eat regular food almost immediately, maybe less food than an adult would, certainly, but they can start eating pretty normal food fairly quickly. I was very impressed when I discovered that the blue wildebeest, which is a impressively large animal, when they are very first born, they can stand within 6 minutes of being born. They can walk in about half an hour after being born, and they can outrun a hyena within a day. And hyenas are fast. They're not like cheetah fast, but they're still very fast. And because of their ability to outrun a hyena that quickly, their populations stay pretty stable because the babies aren't that in need of protection. They can get away on their own. As far as large-scale stereotypes go, I suppose, if you want to put it that way. Marsupials and rodents tend to have very underdeveloped babies, as well as primates like us, humans. And also giant pandas have babies that require a lot of care and protection while they're little, which I think might be the largest animal that has the more attritial types of young.
All right.
And as for the types that have much more independent young, the precocial species, that tends to be birds that nest on the ground, such as ducks and turkeys, because the babies have to be able to move quickly to get away from predators pretty fast, as well as ungulates, like goats.
What's an ungulate?
An animal like a goat. Or a sheep, or similar animals like goats and sheep, and smaller livestock. And also, of course, when you think about it, it makes sense that cetaceans, like whales, dolphins, and porpoises, when they're born, they have to be somewhat independent immediately, because it's not like you can really have a nest for baby dolphins, right? They have to be able to swim and move around on their own.
Yeah. Elephants, because I'm just going to throw elephants in everywhere I can,
all the time,
because they're the best animal. Elephants are closer to the blue wildebeest in that they have to be able to move around pretty quickly. But what's kind of funny about elephants, so they're mammals, so they get milk from their mom and then also incorporate other food. But the trunk of an elephant has so many muscles that it takes time for elephants to figure out how to use the trunk. And so a lot of the time, if you see a baby elephant, it's just got like this trunk that kind of flops around where it's got like a couple muscles that it's figured out how it works, but the rest it doesn't.
Yes.
And so like it's adorable. I love baby elephants. I love elephants. Yeah. And those were mostly, though not exclusively, mostly mammals, which are mostly animals that don't lay eggs. But there are also a bunch of animals that are oviparous, which are, or oviparous? I don't know.
I'm not sure. I will go with
like,
oviparous.
Yeah, one of those. They're the kind of animals that lay eggs. So we'll link to a 1.5 minute YouTube that explains how chickens lay eggs. But the basic process for laying eggs tends to be the same for most animals, though not all, and we'll get into some of the other interesting ones later. But in general, if you're laying eggs, the egg yolk is the part that contains the embryo, and that is what transforms into the baby animal of whatever type. And then the egg white part is what aids the process by providing water to the tiny embryo. And then once the baby fully develops inside the egg, it hatches and the little one breaks its way out of the shell. So for chickens, it's about a 24-hour process from the follicle releasing the yolk and getting a small, like a thin membrane around the yolk, and then heading to the magnum for the albumin, which is the egg white, and then to the isthmus, which is when the membrane gets placed around the yolk and the egg white together. So you get that if you have ever hard-boiled eggs, you can kind of tell what I'm talking about, I think.
That very thin layer.
Yeah. And then the shell is what takes the most time, and that actually takes 20 hours for the calcification and mineralization, and then the egg gets laid.
Yeah. And while I was trying to look up egg facts for this podcast episode, I had an article come across my list from Fresh Eggs Daily that was about fairy eggs, and I had to click. There was no choice involved. I didn't feel like I had a option.
Yeah, it is required.
And it turns out that sometimes chickens who are either just starting to lay eggs or just finishing their laying life will lay these very little eggs that are like a third to half the usual size and are usually rounder than normal chicken eggs, and they don't have any yolks in them. And those are called fairy eggs or witch eggs or fart eggs, depending on who you talk to and what country you're in. And back in the day, hundreds of years ago, people were worried that they were a symbol that your chickens had been cursed by, say, a witch or the fairies, or something was wrong. But actually, this is just a part of both the learning how to lay eggs process and the stopping laying eggs process. And also sometimes they'll happen in the middle of a chicken's life, just sort of as a glitch. So it's not necessarily a bad sign unless, I guess, they just keep laying nothing but fairy eggs. But for the most part, one will show up every so often and it's not a big deal.
Good to know. Yeah. Speaking of strange eggs, there are lots of animals that lay eggs. One of the like most popular categories of animals that lay eggs and yet are not necessarily chickens is birds, which chickens are birds, but not all birds are chickens. So it kind
You
of
heard it
works.
here first, folks.
The biggest bird egg of the species that are currently alive is the ostrich egg, which can weigh 2 kilograms and be 5 to 6 inches around. But interestingly, ostriches actually have the smallest egg if you're doing it relative, like proportional to the size of the adult animal.
Yes.
So the biggest and the smallest at the same time, you go, ostriches, take it all. And then the smallest bird egg is in the UK, the gold crest.
And I think that might actually be the smallest bird egg in the world. I couldn't find any that were smaller in the world, but I also couldn't find anyone that definitively said this was the smallest bird egg in the
Yeah,
world.
the females adults weigh 6 grams and they lay 7 to 10 eggs, which each weigh about a gram. Interestingly, the bee hummingbird is the smallest bird.
Okay.
I believe, from what I've seen.
But not just birds lay eggs. Many of you, of course, also know that crocodiles lay eggs, and their eggs
Mm-hmm.
have a thin and leathery shell to keep them from drying out, which is especially important in a swamp.
Also, turtles and tortoises are famous for laying eggs. Turtles tend to lay eggs on the shore about 110 at a time, and then they will head back into the water and leave the eggs there to hopefully not get eaten and hatch and make it safely back into the sea. So that's one of the like pretty independent kind of animals. And tortoises are land animals, so they'll lay eggs in the land and potentially stay more in the area.
Sure. Frogs also lay eggs, and their eggs take about 20 days to incubate. The eggs are laid first in the water, and then the sperm is essentially cast over them.
Yeah.
And it
The
takes
frog,
about.
the male frog jumps on the female frog and she lays the eggs and the sperm.
I'm glad that they've figured out how to coordinate that dance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, important
And
jumping.
oh yes, absolutely. And it takes about 3 months from birth to maturity, and there can be 5,000 new tadpoles at once. So if you think you have sibling problems.
Yeah, just check out the frog. And then some fish, but not all, lay eggs, and the eggs tend to be fertilized out in the water, similar to frogs, but only a few make it to adulthood because they tend to get eaten or get stuck somewhere or dried up or any number of things that make it so that they don't live. Kind of like Nemo's siblings.
Also, snakes, which can be anywhere between 4 inches long to 20 feet long, internally fertilize their eggs and may lay as many as 15 to 30 eggs at a time.
The platypus is one out of only 5 egg-laying mammals. Also, side note, platypus can produce venom through their feet. It won't kill a human, but it will hurt, apparently. So a platypus will lay 2 to 3 soft eggs about a month after mating, and then there's about a 10-day period before they hatch.
Also known as yet more proof that we will never truly understand God.
And that we will understand that God has a sense of humor.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, while many of us may have concerns about these animals, we do know that we need spiders in our lives. And spiders mate to fertilize. They lay thousands of eggs tangled into a single sac made of woven silk, and they are mostly left to hatch and grow independently. So, kind of like what we read in Charlotte's Web, but not 100% with all the species, you know.
Yep. And then the spiny anteaters, or echidna, are the other 4 mammal species that lay eggs besides the platypus. And those animals will develop an extra layer of skin after the mating season is over so that they have like a pouch, and then the leathery eggs go in the pouch, and the infant will just stay in there because it can milk, and it'll stay in the pouch until the spines develop and irritate the adult.
Nice.
I bet there are plenty of parents who are like, yes.
That sounds very familiar, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And as for lizards, from nanochameleons, which are less than an inch long, to the Komodo dragon, which can be 350 pounds and 10 feet long, lizards tend to lay their eggs in a secluded area and then they are left to mature on their own. And that can include 35 to 40 small eggs, or just a few large ones, depending on the species.
Mm-hmm. And then lots of insects mate actively to produce fertilized eggs, and then those eggs will hatch, and the baby insects usually will molt, which is they'll shed their skin to grow bigger bodies
Yes.
after they hatch.
And hermit crabs, who carry their house around with them, they have abdominal pleopods
Mm,
to attach themselves and to carry their developed eggs, and they can lay thousands of eggs in the water.
yeah. And then finally, and perhaps the best of all, besides the elephant, seahorses, the best egg layer of them all.
I was going to say, elephants don't lay eggs either,
Yeah,
just like bunnies or Jesus.
exactly. Seahorses are technically fish, but they're not the usual fish shape, and they are very slow. They have just one fin that doesn't really help propel them. So they get their own category because they're awesome.
Sure.
But the process for their eggs is that the two seahorses will like hook tails and do a dance together. And then the female will drop the eggs into the pouch in the male's abdomen for fertilization and incubation. And so over a very short period, then hundreds and thousands of babies will be born. But the seahorse is a particularly beloved animal in the trans community because the male
Seahorse dads are the
carries.
best dads.
Yes. Yeah.
And now I want the alternate history of the world where instead of the fish becoming the standard Christian symbol in the beginning of the Christian history, the seahorse becomes the standard Christian symbol. And how does that change Christianity over the years?
That would be awesome.
I would love that. So it seemed kind of rude to try to do this particular deep dive and not offer you any pictures of baby animals. And so, being a loving and caring podcast host as I am, and also very altruistic and humble, I went and looked through some various animal picture contests and collections of baby animal pictures, and I found 3 collections in particular that have a good wide variety of fairly high resolution photos that are very cute, and lots of those photos. And so there were many other like collections and photo contests, but these 3 had just a whole bunch of pictures for the one click.
Wow.
So
what
this
a
is
sacrifice, Kay.
I know.
Thank you so much.
I put so much time into this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is 2 baby animal picture contests and 1 collection from Reader's Digest of baby animal pictures. And there's lots of different animals in there. Most of them are wild animals. So they're pretty cool. And also, of course, on our social media, we will be sharing the baby animal pictures that you all sent in to us in the next several days. And so thank you so much to Catherine, Leslie, Pace, and the rest of you for sending in your baby animal photos. Keep sending us more, and we will keep sharing them. That is because we care about you and your baby animals. And also because we just really like baby animal pictures because we're human.
And because it's important to get through Holy Week, and what better way to do it than with baby animal pictures?
We care about your sanity, and we can't afford to pay for your therapy, so this is what we can do.
Which is not the worst thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We're being helpful. So, Emily, do you have any pop culture references you would like to share with the rest of us that involve eggs or baby animals?
Yeah. In fact, I am currently eating some jelly bird eggs, also known as jelly beans. I don't know why Brox is calling them jelly bird eggs, but I'm here for it because it lets me talk about them on here.
Yes.
Yeah. So
I believe jelly bean is actually a trademark. Much like
really?
Twix.
Because Sweet Tarts say jelly beans.
Maybe they have a deal. Maybe they're both owned by Nestle. Actually, now that I think about it. Or some of you who are Doctor Who fans, particularly of the Tom Baker series, might remember that in England for quite a long time, instead of having jelly beans, they had jelly babies. These are not actual babies. No cannibalism involved. They are just jelly beans that are, I think, actually sort of shaped like babies, but really jelly beans. And Tom Baker's Doctor Number 4 was known for offering them to people and confusing the heck out of aliens in the process.
Understandable. And then, so in Let It Snow, the delightful Netflix movie that is Love Actually as it should have been, and could have been. One of the characters ends up, they're besties and they love pigs and pig puns, and they end up buying a baby pig for the other, which is a great place to remind people that there's no such thing as like baby small pigs. Like, they don't
Right.
stay small forever.
They don't, in fact, stay small for very long. And also, buying a pet for
Mm-hmm.
someone else without their active involvement is not the greatest idea. And please especially remember that on Easter, because that's also true when it comes to baby chicks and baby bunnies.
Mm-hmm. To be clear, in Let It Snow, it was a mutually, like, it was a good
Oh,
call.
great. Yeah, that's great.
Aside from the fact that pigs grow, and nobody
Yeah.
pays attention to that part, but the other part, yeah. Also, for those who have read the book or seen the movie Marley and Me, it definitely has a bunch of baby animals, as does 101 Dalmatians and all of the movies in those series, and
Absolutely.
Beethoven and the books or the movies in that. I used to love those movies. They were fun.
And of course, if you're in need of some other cartoon animals, many of us grew up with Roo while watching Winnie the Pooh, Roo the baby
Mm-hmm.
his mom can't get.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, there's also the Muppet Babies, who are not all baby animals, but a couple of them are. And a couple of them are a little,
Yeah.
fuzzy on exactly what species they are, but they're still very cute.
Fuzzy. Because they're fuzzy, because they're Muppets.
Yes.
Well done, well done. Also, there's a few different elephant documentaries out there, and they all have at least one calf, which is adorable.
Excellent. Also, if you're looking for a documentary on wild animal babies, there is actually a documentary called Wild Babies available on Netflix.
Yeah, I think it's a 8-episode season or
Wow.
something. Also, if you want just the first year of life for an elephant calf in Kenya, Little Giant on Disney Plus. I just found it and I put it on my to-watch list, and I'm super excited.
Excellent. And if what you're really in need of is puppies and kittens, there is also the Too Cute TV show from Animal Planet, which is available to watch on Tubi, where you basically follow puppies and kittens from birth until they are ready to be adopted out. This is not a high cognitive involvement show. I find it's really helpful to watch when I'm in the middle of a really terrible cold or I have the flu. It's very comforting under those circumstances. It's really cutesy when you're actually functional. So keep that in mind.
Noted. So yeah, but definitely let us know if you have other baby animals that show up in the shows you're watching or that you want to share with us, and send us all the baby animal pictures you can find, and we will gladly share them throughout Holy Week.
Yes.
And as we dive into our readings, we are doing 4 readings for this episode because the Acts reading can either replace Jeremiah or it can replace Colossians. So depending on what you choose, we have got you covered no matter what. And so we'll do the Acts reading right between the two. So our first reading is Jeremiah chapter 31, verses 1 through 6. God promises the people of Israel everlasting love and a future filled with music and harvest. So one of the themes in this passage is the idea of a return to joy. And it reminded me of season 6 of Buffy, where they had originally thought that it was going to end after season 5. And so they kind of killed Buffy in this self-sacrifice for the good of the world kind of thing. And then they got more seasons. And so they bring Buffy back to life. And for her friends, there is this immediate return to joy of Buffy's back, yay. And Buffy definitely needs some time to adjust. And I imagine that the people of Israel coming back from exile would also some of them might be really excited and others might need some time to adjust. They probably didn't have to claw their way out of being literally 6 feet under, but they had to deal with some stuff in the exile.
Yeah. So in verse 1, we read, "At that time, says the Lord, I will be the God of all the families of Israel, and they shall be my people." And something about the way that all the families of Israel was phrased gave me a very The Godfather vibe for this verse. Speaking of The Godfather, and I'm just wondering, is Marlon Brando somewhere in the background here, receiving promises from people? And that's a very different kind of covenant, I'm just saying.
It's true. On this, the day of my daughter's wedding.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's the best. I don't have a good impressions thing, but
That wasn't bad. Yeah.
oh, thanks.
Well,
I tried. I
you
don't
are
really try very
extremely
hard,
different
but
from
I
Marlon
try.
Brando, so, yeah.
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 And then in verse 2, we read, "Thus says the everlasting. The people who survived the sword found grace in the wilderness when Israel sought for rest." And this reminded me of the first serial in classic Doctor Who of the Daleks. And the
Mhm.
Thalls are like a humanoid alien species who had survived war and nuclear destruction and actually like had turned from violence and found grace in the wilderness, right? Had found ways to live and survive in the wilderness, except for, when the Daleks tried to ruin even that. But
I mean, that's Daleks for you. Yeah.
pretty much.
And in verse 4b, we read, "Again, you shall take your tambourines and go forth in the dance of the merrymakers." And I just thought as I read this, God would really appreciate it if you didn't leave your musical instruments all over the living room again, Israel. Please clean up after yourselves. Your mom does not work here. Although, to be fair, thanks to my mom, this verse also gives me the mental image of Richard Gere dancing in a loincloth from that one movie where he played King David. It might have actually been called King David, I don't remember. Although I have
I
no
did
memory
not watch
whatsoever
that
of the
movie.
rest of that movie, so I may have only seen that scene and it may have been at my mom's behest, which definitely sounds like my mom. But he had a tambourine.
Yeah, that seems like a good scarred for life kind of
If you're into Richard Gere,
situation.
apparently it's a really good scene. I wasn't, but yeah.
Yeah. Then in verse 5, we read, "Again you shall plant vineyards on the mountains of Samaria. The planters shall plant and shall enjoy the fruit." Unless, of course, the fruit of the plants is oregano, because I tried that one year. We gave out seeds to everybody in the congregation on Ash Wednesday during the pandemic, and then everybody, and pots and stuff, and everybody grew their own plants. And I tried oregano multiple times, and it is hard to grow. Or I might just not be meticulous enough to grow it and not paying enough attention to what it needs. I don't know. But
I
oregano is
don't
hard.
know,
Stick with
but
basil.
my first question would be, how old were those seeds?
We bought them new.
Oh, well, that doesn't necessarily mean anything depending on the company you bought them from. But yes. Okay.
Fair.
Yeah. And yeah, I don't offhand know if oregano is particularly hard to grow, but I know that it is
I've
super
heard,
easy to find yourself trying to grow stuff from old seeds, and that is kind of a nightmare. So.
yeah, I've heard that it's harder to grow oregano than other things. So,
Okay.
but I like oregano. So I was like,
yeah, it's good
this
with
is a
scrambled
great
eggs.
one.
And then our Acts reading for today is from Acts chapter 10, verses 34 through 43. Peter summarizes Jesus' life, death, and resurrection for a small crowd at the home of the Roman military officer Cornelius.
So, one of the themes in this passage, so this one is part of the larger storytelling of the story of Peter and Cornelius and their interactions and God's role in all of it and stuff. But it got me thinking, if it were today, would Peter be doing this via blog, podcast, TikTok, YouTube? How would he be telling this story of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection?
Yeah, that's a more complicated question.
I think that Peter would use TikTok. I think Peter would want to use TikTok, but I think it would be best done probably via YouTube.
I think Peter would use social media in a very particular way that is certainly different from any other Bible character.
Yeah. Peter just
and
seems...
definitely would throw himself headlong into things without thinking of the consequences, which would maybe not work out too well on social media, actually.
Yep. Yeah. But that's why I was thinking TikTok maybe, because you can just boom, there it is, done. Or you can take lots of time. And then as we dive into the verses, in verse 34, Peter begins to speak to the crowd and says, "I truly understand that God shows no partiality." And this seems not completely accurate, but it does seem like if you're in the IDI progression, so IDI is the Intercultural Development Inventory, I believe is what it's called, but it kind of measures intercultural competency and how you understand your own culture and other cultures and the comparison between the two and stuff. So it's at first Peter was very early on in that because his thinking was only his people were the best, people of Israel, that whole thing. And then God got him to the next point, which is got no partiality. So everybody's the same. We have so many more similarities than we do differences. And so then the next step for him will be getting to the celebrating the diversity and difference and recognizing that as good. So keep going, Peter.
Yeah.
You can do it.
Yeah. And then we read verse 36. You know the message he sent to the people of Israel, that is God, preaching peace by Jesus Christ, who is Lord of all. And the whole concept of Jesus having access to social media is, I mean, a lot, but also a little terrifying, let's be honest. Like, Jesus's way with words, plus social media, plus the way that the globe's temper seems to work with social media. Like, I'm thinking a lot of flame wars. I think he probably would have done pretty well with Twitter before the recent upheavals with Twitter because, I mean, we see in the Bible he's very snappy. He can do the comeback. That is not a problem. I also think that Tumblr would probably suit him pretty well, that he does seem to have quite the sense of humor, and the longer form might let him, explain a few things beyond the whole don't set people on fire concept, which I agree is important, but like also explaining some of your more cryptic thoughts might be worth it. Just saying, Jesus. I have trouble figuring out if he would be interested in the social media options that are more image based, like Instagram or Snapchat, because if he cared for people to know what he looked like, because Jesus clearly knew how important his showing up was to the world, I think he would have had a portrait made, and either that didn't happen or, it was horribly lost or something. So, like, I don't know that the image part would matter to him. But
yeah, Instagram and Snapchat do seem less like a Jesus thing, but
yeah. Although, he might want to take pictures of his breakfast on the beach. So
it's true. It's true. Oh my gosh. At some point, we're going to end up with in Advent. The first year of the pandemic, I did adventures. And I took pictures of like the Magi making their way and Mary and Jesus and all of that stuff. But that could be hilarious to have like a Jesus Instagram that never takes an actual picture of like Jesus, but has like the breakfast and the beach and all of that stuff. That would be fantastic. I'm a fan.
yeah, absolutely.
And then in verse 39, Peter continues and says, we are witnesses to all that Jesus did both in Judea and in Jerusalem. They put him to death by hanging him on a tree. And every time I think of this, I think of James Cone's book, The Cross and the Lynching Tree, and the connection between contemporary and recent history lynchings in the United States and the crucifixion of Jesus, and the ways that that plays out even in like literature, right? With the Hunger Games and the song about a lynching and meeting somebody on the hanging tree.
Yeah. And then in verse 41, we read, not to all the people, but to us who were chosen by God as witnesses, and who ate and drank with Jesus after he rose from the dead. And so ordinarily, I am very big on God's table not having an exclusive guest list, like everybody's invited to God's table. But if it's literally your first meal after having been crucified and raised from the dead, which sounds, pretty horrifying, I'm actually on board with Jesus not having to deal with randos for that meal. Like, you get to just hang out with your friends, Jesus. That's fine. This is not a theological statement. This is Jesus getting to have a minute to relax with his buddies before he gears up for all the pre-ascension stuff he has to do. So that's cool.
Yeah, agreed. You take your time, Jesus. And then our next reading for this episode is Colossians 3, verses 1 through 4. The author encourages us to focus our lives around Jesus Christ. And one of the themes in this passage is this like hidden and revealed aspects. So I couldn't help it. I was just like, is this basically just a cosmic game of peekaboo or hide and seek? Yeah. So have fun playing whichever of those games you see fit.
Sure. And then in verse 2, we read, set your minds on things that are above, not on things that are on earth. And, in a philosophical sense, this is fine. In a theological sense, this is fine. In a practical sense, please do watch where you're going as best you can, or else bad things happen. And Ursula Vernon, who is an author of both various cartoons and also various horror stories, has done some choose your own adventure stories on Twitter, one of which I'm actually participating in right now, where she does polls for the choices for what we can do next. And then, all of our actions have consequences, and some of those consequences are death.
Oh, cool.
And so not watching where you're going,
the death part, but
gets us killed. But, well, the important part is that while we often die, so far we have managed to save Jimmy the Dungeon Finch every time. So Jimmy the Dungeon Finch is skilled in warning us about traps and is generally a nice companion, but is also apparently, like, going through some PTSD from watching several adventurers die. So, but he's alive, and that's the important thing.
There you go. Yeah. Yep.
He somehow manages to light and smoke cigarettes without us knowing where he keeps the cigarettes or the matches. But
That's
that's a
impressive.
Dungeon Finch for you. Yeah, they're very, very tiny.
I also looked at verse 2, but I was like, oh, so like hot air balloons for Jesus. Just like floating up there. Also, it made me think of our Ascension episodes, past and future, and the ways that.
And my mom actually went to a hot air balloon show once, and her pictures were spectacular. So I think Jesus would be up for that. That sounds like fun.
There's a puzzle it's either mine or it's my best friend's, and I've just borrowed it a couple times. It's hot air balloons, and it's fantastic.
Nice.
Yeah. And then in verse 3 we read, "For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God." And I'm thinking about that particularly today because we are recording on Transgender Day of Visibility, which is a fair amount harder, I think, for many of us this year because, like, honestly, I'm at the stage where I'm like, no, please don't perceive me, which is like a thing that a lot of trans people say, sometimes in jest, sometimes seriously, but also like thinking about how often we hide our true selves. And it's not just trans people, but how often we hide our true selves and our lives from the rest of the world. And I'm just wrapping up because I ended up doing it for 2 weeks, the Trans Rights Readathon. And so like the power of stories to share our own lives and to read our own lives in books, but also to read about the lives of other people who are different from us and to explore the world through other people's perspectives.
Yeah. And then in verse 4 we read, "When Christ, who is your life, is revealed, then you also will be revealed with him in glory." And, to be clear, this is not in a Wizard of Oz kind of way. Like, Jesus is not, despite what various cartoons you see on the internet may tell you otherwise, Jesus is not actually hiding behind a curtain. That is not how Jesus works.
What?
Unless, when Jesus comes back as one of the things to relax from the horror of the last time, he decides to learn how to play hide and go seek, along with, say, going to hot air balloon shows. But for the moment, not so much. Yeah. And our gospel reading for this episode is from Matthew chapter 28, verses 1 through 10. Mary and Mary Magdalene return to Jesus' tomb to find it empty and are greeted by an angel and then Jesus, who sends them to tell the good news to the disciples.
This story is basically a meet cute with the resurrected Jesus. I have decided. It's not quite as cute as some of the Meet Cute Diaries, the book Meet Cute Diaries, Meet Cute stories, but not bad as far as meet cutes go. I cannot say that phrase.
Especially on a day when we've been talking about cute things so often.
I know.
Yeah. So in verse 2 we read, "And suddenly there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descending from heaven came and rolled back the stone and sat on it." And I don't know what it is, but I've read this verse a lot, as you might expect, but I hadn't really noticed the whole fact that the angel apparently comes down from heaven and in the same motion rolls the stone away. And so I was trying to think about how I would do that if I was the angel. And I think that if you're going to move the stone so it rolls away while being above it, and then you're immediately going to sit on it, if you're not actually doing somersaults in the air, which the angel might be. I don't know how good the angel is at flying or how the angel feels about, hitting 5G while doing a barrel roll. But I think the easiest way to do that without doing multiple flips in the air and probably making myself throw up would be to kick the stone and then sit down on it so that you're not, flipping around a lot. And that,
kind of as I'm trying to...
Yes, swoop in, kick the stone, and then sit down on it. But not a lot of somersaults in the air. Yeah. And it strikes me as a very youth pastor in a backwards ball cap kind of move, like pulling out a chair and sitting in it backwards as in terms of a way to introduce yourself to a new crowd of people, even if the crowd is just two women who are coming to Jesus' tomb. And also it seems, possibly slightly emotionally clueless, but also given the way that the guards are about to respond, maybe there's a reason for that. So I'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love that imagery. I was thinking about the angel, and in verse 3 we read, "The angel's appearance was like lightning, and their clothing white as snow." And so a biblically accurate angel has like a whole bunch of eyeballs. And so I was like, lightning eyeballs? Like the contacts that make your pupils look like cat eyes, but instead of cat eyes, it's like lightning bolt shapes in your pupils, but like a million eyeballs, all with lightning bolt shaped pupils.
I can't decide which one is actually scarier. I don't
Yes.
like any of them. But in terms of, angels' appearances, yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
Sure. Speaking of, in verse 4, we read, "For fear of the angel," or him, "the guards shook and became like dead men." And I suppose you could also say, like the line from Scrubs, "Men don't faint, we take unintended decisive naps," which I'm sure is exactly how the guards will explain themselves when they wake up. Thank you, toxic masculinity. So
yeah. Also, I think they get like a bonus for falling asleep while somebody came in and stole Jesus' body in Matthew, I think is the one.
Possibly.
Isn't it?
Yeah. Something like that. Yeah. I don't remember if it's Matthew, but there is one of the Gospels where that happens.
Yeah. And then the angel instructs Mary and Mary Magdalene, "Then go quickly and tell Jesus' disciples, Jesus has been raised from the dead and indeed is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see them. This is my message for you." So this, I was like, oh, it's like when Gandalf tells Frodo, "Meet me at the prancing pony." And then Strider shows up and has like another, like, intercepts with the plan. Except this time, Jesus is the one intercepting with the same plan. But
yeah,
still, yeah. Also, and now for our cutest segment, let's make a Muppets musical.
Oh, goodness. So, of these readings, who has the cutest Muppet? I feel like that's the obvious question, right?
I mean, we already have basically a Miss Piggy that's like an angel, but
I don't know that an angel is cute, though. Like, Miss Piggy is always cute and also, generally wonderful, but an angel doesn't really strike me as cute. I kind of think the name Cornelius lends itself to cuteness. Possibly just because we don't use the name very often anymore. And, like, people who are named that in stories these days tend to be, like, characters, kind of like the Muppets, actually.
Yeah. Cornelius could be one of the singing corn. It'd be so corny.
Yes. Absolutely. I love that. And as for Mary and Mary Magdalene going back and talking to the angel and then to Jesus, I don't know. They could be lots of Muppets.
I know, but...
I mean, they get to be the first ones to go tell the disciples. And if you're going to have someone get to be the first one to tell someone something, Miss Piggy gets such joy out of that, of being the one taking the news, right? And so it could be her and then, one of her cousins or something. So that seems like...
Yeah, it could be her cousin or who's the singer in the electric band?
Janice. Nice. Janice with the blonde hair. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Janice could definitely do it.
Yeah.
So Miss Piggy could be Mary, and Janice could be Mary Magdalene. I think we've cast Janice as Mary Magdalene before.
Oh, I had them switched, but yeah, okay.
Janice has the hair to do the Mary Magdalene story,
wiping the feet
with the alabaster jar, and also the song from Jesus Christ Superstar, which I think is
That's fair. Yeah. Okay. I like it.
Thanks for joining us. Catch us next time when we'll discuss nerdery connections to the scripture readings for the second Sunday of Easter. This podcast has been produced by us, Kay Rohloff and Emily Ewing. For more fun, check us out on Twitter and Facebook at Nerds at Church, or contact us at nerdsatchurch@gmail.com.
Also, if you like what you've heard, rate us or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Facebook, or wherever you catch your podcasts. If you want access to our uncut guest episodes and interviews, live Q&As, and more, support us on Patreon at patreon.com/nerdsatchurch. It's cheaper than raising any baby animal for any length of time, especially a baby pig. They grow fast.
And they eat a lot. Yes. Also, let us know on Facebook or Twitter who you would cast for Let's Make a Muppets musical for this episode.
As the ancient Christian said, Pax Vobiscum.